What's up everyone, my name's David. Hope everyone's doing well today and having a great summer. With summer, there's a lot of things that happen. People are going on holidays more, they're traveling, they're going out to eat, drink more, and driving more. So it made me think, is owning a car necessary these days when you have apps like Uber and Lyft that can take you almost anywhere with just one click of the button? For me, I've owned my car for a few years and I want to explain kind of like the pros and cons of owning a car, along with some of the benefits of possibly using like rideshare apps like Uber and Lyft. According to an article by The Balance, they estimate that it costs roughly $9,000 to $11,000 to own a car. Keep in mind, for their examples, they use figures and estimates done by Kelley Blue Book for a car that was new and over $30,000. When owning a car, typically the largest cost is the car itself. So for a new car that costs roughly $30,000 in a course of 5 years, it's going to cost you $500 a month. If you put that to a year, it's going to cost you $6,000. The next type of cost for owning a car would be interest. Oftentimes, when you're financing a loan to purchase a car, the bank's going to charge you interest. So that interest is going to vary from person to person depending on your credit score, how long the loan is, and sometimes even how much you're borrowing. Depending on these factors, it can give you a wide range. So it can go as low as $30, $40 a month, all the way up to a couple $100. So if you just aim for the middle for roughly $100 a month, you're averaging around roughly $1,200 within the year. The cost of car insurance is going to factor a few things about you, such as your credit history, your driving history, marital status, and sometimes your location. So it's kind of hard, again, to figure out what a rough estimate is. Just with my experience, a fair insurance rate would be roughly $100 a month. And again, it's going to estimate to roughly $1,200 within a year. And the last two types of costs for owning a car would be gas and maintenance. Depending how often you drive your car and how often it breaks down, it's going to vary between person to person again. But on average, based on the article, it estimates that for the gas, along with the maintenance, it's going to average roughly $1,000 for each of the categories. In total, with the types of costs that I mentioned before, it's going to add up to roughly that $9,000 to the $11,000 costs that the article explains and estimates. So you're probably thinking, it's a lot of money. And I know, I agree. For this case, it's with a new car that costs over $30,000, and it's not going to be the case for everyone. Owning a car is not cheap. And for my example, it may not relate to you, but the thought is that with this example, you want to kind of break down to figure out what your true cost of your car is. After hearing all the types of costs that you accrue when owning a car, you probably get deterred and don't even want to own a car anymore and just go straight to using Uber or Lyft. But let me break it down to what actually costs for actually using these rideshare apps. The first factor will be your base fare. The base fare is basically what is charged for your trips for any of the rideshare apps. So regardless of the time that you're in the vehicle or the distance that you travel, it's basically your initial cost for just even registering for a ride. Next would be distance. Generally, trips that are longer in distance are going to cost you more money. So if you're able to either walk towards your destination closer or using options such as Uber Pool, it'll bring your costs down lower. And on the other side, time. Time is directly correlated and connected with distance. So as time increases for the ride, it's going to increase the fare for your trip. Another aspect of time to consider is traffic. So the more congested your city is, or the more people that are in your city or town, it's going to take a longer time to go through because there's so many more cars on the road. So just factor in that the more congested or the more traffic that you experience, your trip's going to be longer and your trip's going to be more costly. And lastly, booking fees. Booking fees are additional expenses that the companies such as Uber and Lyft charges to the rider in relation to for taxes or other regulation costs based on your city or your area that you're living in. Overall, these are the factors that go into the cost when you're scheduling a ride for some of these rideshare apps. Now that I explained the components and factors that goes into owning a car versus using rideshare apps like Uber and Lyft, let me talk about like the pros and cons for each of them. To start off, the first pro for owning a car would be freedom and control. Owning a car gives a lot of flexibility to the individual, such as if they want to go to a weekend trip to hike in a mountain somewhere, it could be very remote that they don't have to rely on someone to come back to pick them up, because oftentimes that these Uber or Lyft drivers, they won't go to anywhere that's super far or out of the way. It also gives a lot of control to the owner because they don't have to worry about a set time that a Uber or Lyft driver is coming to pick them up. So they're flexible, they can go as early as they want or as late as they want for any activity or plans that they have. Number two, asset ownership. That means you can do anything with it. Either drive it to the ground, you can let your friend borrow your car, you can sell it, and even modify it. Those were the pros of owning a car. Now these are the cons. The first con would be the high initial cost. When buying a car at the dealership, the sales agent is going to ask you if you want to put a down payment. So roughly that could be 10 to 50%. Most of the times that could be a couple hundred to a couple thousand depending on the car. If you don't have money for a down payment to pay towards the car, oftentimes that you may experience higher rates from dealerships for your loan, or the dealership's going to be harder to negotiate towards the price of the car. This situation can create challenges for some people, so it can make car ownership more of a curse than a blessing. The next con for owning a car is that it's a depreciating asset. A car is a depreciating asset, which means that over time it actually loses value generally. Unlike a house that actually appreciates or goes up in value, a car will go down in value the more you use it and then as time progresses. If you're looking to sell your car, keep in mind that oftentimes when you sell your car, more likely than not that your car is going to be sold less than what you actually purchased for. And the last con for owning a car is higher risk and liabilities. As I mentioned before, some of the costs for owning a car would be maintenance. And by chance, if you get into an accident where you hit a guardrail or a pothole, all the costs and expenses are at your risk and liabilities. Those are the pros and cons for owning a car. Let's talk about the pros and cons for using rideshare app. The first pro for using rideshare app is low initial costs. One of the main benefits of using these rideshare app is that you're not paying the upfront cost of insurance, registrations, any maintenance. To give you background, when I first bought my car, I was hit with a lot of extra fees such as registration, gap insurance, regular insurance, and other additional costs. When I first started out, there was a point where my insurance for the car was actually close to the payment for the car itself. So if you think about it, I'm paying for 2 cars in that aspect. And if you're using Uber and Lyft, take it as a blessing that you're not actually paying for these charges. And the next pro is variable cost. With variable cost, that means from month to month, your expenses and totals won't be the same. So that can actually be positive because you're able to take control of your spending and your habits. So overall, especially with times like right now, when people aren't going out as much and they're not really seeing or traveling, you can actually drop down the costs. In comparison of, say, if you were owning a car and you had insurance, you had to pay for parking, you had to pay for gas, you had to pay for the car itself. But in the case that you have a lavish lifestyle or spend a lot or go out, this may be actually a detriment for you. And the last pro is simplicity. Uber and Lyft really makes their application really easy and user-friendly. So it's really simple for us to use if in case you just want to go to point A to point B. When owning a car, you have to factor in a few additional things such as insurance, registration, and parking if your place doesn't have parking. If you're using Lyft or Uber, you don't have to worry about those things. So the hassle's not there and it makes things for traveling a lot simpler. We talked about the pros of using rideshare apps, so now let's talk about the cons. First con is lack of freedom and control. So as mentioned before, when you own a car, you have a lot of freedom where you can go at the times and the places. If you're an avid explorer or adventurer who likes to go outside the city or outside your area, it's hard for requesting for rides or drivers who want to go to the areas that you're going to, just because a lot of people and drivers don't want to go one way and go back for a long distance. Keep in mind, if this is your interest or lifestyle, you probably wanted to look into possibly owning a car versus using these rideshare apps, just because you don't want to be stuck into a remote place where you don't know the area or the people and potentially get hurt. So if this is sounding like you and you like to go on weekend trips, you might want to look into purchasing a car versus using rideshare apps. And the next con is lack of ownership. If you're the type of person who wants to own a car just because you like it recreationally, or you like driving, or you want to modify a car, then you probably won't want to use rideshare apps too often. And if you're a person who doesn't like cars or like driving, then this probably isn't con for you. And as I mentioned before, a car is a depreciating asset. And if you're investment minded, you probably don't want to invest into a car just because over time it's going to be worth less and you're not going to get as much as you put in. And the last con would be security. With the growing popularity and usage for Uber and Lyft, there's often risk of security. So overall, we're hearing about more cases where people's lives are at risk, they're being attacked, they're being harassed as riders along top of drivers. And I want to bring attention and light to this con just because I think most people who are using these apps don't oftentimes think about the risk and kind of the liabilities that as a rider they are ultimately putting themselves through. After hearing about the pros and cons for each side for using rideshare apps and owning a car, I found that there's a very easy analysis and break-even point to use when making your decision. With my research and experience, I found that the location that you're at is the biggest factor for the cost of your rides. So if you're in a big city, I would say roughly 50 trips or less, you're breaking even that it's costing less for you to use rideshare apps versus owning a car. Anything more than that, I believe that you're actually spending more than you're actually getting from using these apps. Keep in mind that this estimate example is based off the average price of $15 per trip. And I know that some trips, let's say in New York or LA, could be a lot more just because of traffic or just because of surge prices. But those are some of the largest populated cities within the US, so it's kind of hard to average them out and put them into it just because they skew some of the numbers. I found that $15 for a big city is average and reasonable. Now, if you're in a mid-sized city such as Philadelphia, I would say if you're taking 75 trips or less within a month, it's actually cheaper for you to use rideshare apps versus owning a car. And lastly, I want to say that if you're in a small city or a small town, I would say roughly 90 trips or less, it's costing you less to use these rideshare apps versus owning a car. Also, I want to say if you're finding this information being useful or helpful in any way, please give a like to the video and comment if you're finding that you're more leaning towards using rideshare apps or if you're leaning to car ownership. After hearing about the pros and cons for each side, You may be leaning towards one side over another, but let me give you 5 things to kind of think about before you make that decision. The first thing is the type of car. For the type of car, there's 2 characteristics that I want you to think about. First is the price and reliability. If you're borrowing money to purchase a car, I would say that the cost itself is generally going to be the most expensive monthly expense that people are paying every month. That being said, with all the estimates and figures I gave you so far, it's in comparison of using a car that's roughly $30,000. So if your car is less than $30,000 substantially, it's going to be beneficial for you to owning that car. Or if you've got the car as a gift, that's even better. Next is the reliability of the car. So maintenance and repairs isn't something that we constantly think about. And it's not something that we can do every year or even 2 years. Sometimes it could be every 3 years or every 5 years. But the thing is that repairs and maintenance are something that we don't really forecast or predict, and it's really unexpected. So these costs can really add up. So it could be simple as just maintenance for oil changes or rotating your car's tires. But if your car engine blows out, that could be several $1,000s and could be the majority worth of the car. And the key for this is you want to make sure you look at reviews, safety ratings, and see if other opinions for other drivers say this car is reliable and dependable. The more dependable and reliable for your car, the better it's going to be for car ownership versus using rideshare apps. The second thing is lifestyle. And when I say lifestyle, it's not about going to bars, restaurants, or clubs every day. It's also about your marital status, your lifestyle, your activity, your preferences, your hobbies, all of that. Depending on your life situation and your hobbies, it's going to dictate your habits of how you spend and how you're going to be able to use your car versus using rideshare apps. I would say if you're with somebody or you like to have active lifestyles where you're going outside the city or outside your area, I would recommend owning a car versus using rideshare apps just for the safety and convenience of it, because there's often times where when you're requesting Uber or Lyft that they may not even go to some of these remote sites, and if you want to request back, it's even more difficult to come back to your place. The third reason is work. Work is a big part of our lives and a big majority of our day. It's roughly 33% of what we spend within a given day. For me, I would say if it takes me roughly an hour one way to go to work, I'll actually try to look at options for public transit or rideshare apps or carpool. If you're fortunate to live in a big city or a place that has good public transit, I would say opt into public transit. More likely than not, you're going to be spending a lot less using public transit versus using your car. And given the state of the world and the country, I would say that if you have the option to work remote, look into factors and go into the futures to see if you can actually work remote some of the days within a week so you can bring down the cost. So even if you use public transit, you don't have to do a monthly pass. And if you have options to do rideshare apps, you can look into that, even though that car ownerships may be more convenient. If you break down the numbers, that it may be even more cost efficient if you use a combination of public transit, rideshare apps versus just driving to work every day. The fourth thing is location. As you're probably hearing, the common theme is location, location, location. But if you're living in a big city or a place that has good public transit, such as Tokyo or France, I would actually recommend using public transit / rideshare apps. Now, it's unfair that I'm using public transit in combination for these rideshare apps, but hear me out. Because one of the benefits of what I mentioned before of the flexibility of using rideshare apps and not always paying them, that's why you want to use these rideshare apps, because you're able to be more flexible with the cost rather than being dependent of always using a car that you're paying every month. And if you're living in a mid-city that has bad public transit and you want to look into a car, just try to break down the numbers, see if it makes sense for you to own a car versus if you want to use rideshare apps. And lastly, number 5, financial credit. Now, financial credit may not be the most obvious reason for us to kind of factor in for this decision, but it's something that we indirectly have to figure out. As I mentioned before, most of us are going to be borrowing money to purchase a car. So depending on your financial credit and situation, it's going to factor in how much you actually be paying overall. If your credit score is on the lower end, it's going to be more costly for you and detrimental for you to purchase a car. So I would recommend actually using rideshare apps for the meantime and using other ways of paying off your credit cards or other bills just to boost up your credit. And if you're curious to know what a credit score is and how to improve upon it, I did a video in the past, so just click on the link above. But in the chance that you have great or good credit, I'll actually ask that you kind of look into car ownerships, just because with the good credit, you get more options and it's better to just assess your situations because it gives you more opportunity for you to figure out how is your situation and if it's better for you to do one over the other. To summarize, there's a lot of things that you have to factor in when owning a car or using rideshare apps, such as the type of car, your location, your financial credit, your lifestyle, and how close you are to work. So I hope this video is helping for you. If you thought the video was useful for you, like I said, give a like to the video, share the video, comment down below. What do you think is better for you? Do you want to own a car, or do you think about yourself using rideshare apps such as Uber and Lyft? Thank you, everyone. I'll see you next time.